life, how this has been true for us. And one fabulous observation was made at my table, and the lovely gentleman has consented to share it with all of us.
Again, my name is Eric. I'm a member of a 12-step recovery program. I've been there for over 10 years. And I was commenting or asking about the connection between what we're reading here and the concept that is used in 12-step recovery for people who are living a life of fear and despair and hopelessness, and how they use the concept of looking to God as a higher power in our lives to help us in situations where we are helpless and where fear is dominating us, and where that fear causes us to adopt behaviors that are not in our own best interests. And what I find interesting in this particular session tonight is that this is a theological expression of the Bible and what God is trying to help us understand. But not everybody has the benefit of sitting here and dissecting these words the way we are. But the spiritual sense of these words and how we live our daily lives and how we trust in a higher power in God to help alleviate our fears and our sorrows and our angers and frustrations come from these words that we're reading. And I find that it's very important for me to understand the theological genesis for what is my spiritual belief or way of life.
Thank you so much. That was beautifully put. And even, then, right, the difference between saying, do you believe in God versus do you trust in God? And sometimes belief can make us go on that road toward baptism and say, oh, here's a sacrament you do, here's a liturgy. But to say that you trust in God is a much more moment-by-moment experience for all of us, whether it's right before we fall into bed or right before we get up to try and get through another day and whatever God is going to bring to us in that moment. So no. Incredible. Other thoughts? Go for it, my love.
Well, the concept of born again is something that we were exposed to, and it's something that I didn't realize how much importance people put it onto it. But our daughter went to a small school in college in Ohio, and there was a faction of students that followed a more fundamental Christian belief. And our daughter, she had a very good friend for the first maybe 4-5 years, and they went to church together. It was all just a nice friendship, probably her best friend. And then the last year or so, he all of a sudden started with the born again and took it to such an extent that if you had not been born again, he didn't want to associate with you. And at this point, he has removed himself except for that community of people that are born again. So I'm not quite sure how he got from one step to the other.
But it can definitely be a sort of who's in and who's out. I think somebody once asked me if I was a believer, and I was like, in what? No, but the lottery? No. John, you got a question, or are you just excited? Okay. Is that a jazz hand? Or no? There you go.
Just even going back to the belief and trust, I guess I'm a believer, but every once in a while the trust is like, why did God let that happen? I trusted you not to be, am I trusting you not to let Vegas happen? Like, why did that happen? I can still believe, it seems like, but the trusting him to do things, I stumble over every once in a while. If that Makes sense.
That's not what the microphone is for, John. No. No, and of course then, right, and we sort of had this in the readings last week, right? Rejoice in the Lord. Stand firm in the Lord here. Trust in God. And then it not necessarily saying much about trusting in God to do such and such. And even, yes, what is the radical trusting in God when the sky seems to be falling? Whether it's in your personal life or your, broader spectrum. So no, the fact that trust is not an easy sort of, if I were just trusting in God, I would be having a much more pleasant experience of this really hard situation that I'm in. That there's something very bracing about that kind of life, especially when you know there's a lot of suffering, and you know suffering in yourself and people that you love, that it's not trusting, it's trusting through that, not in spite of it or against it. Any other thoughts as we're wrapping up? Somebody got a final burning desire on them? Mark Peters. Donna's got one. Mark's just full of wisdom anyway. There you go.
Well, I was just wondering about Nicodemus. I don't know if it's only me, but you don't hear about him a whole lot. And how did he get picked out by John to be the one that he wanted to discuss? And he's a complex guy. I mean, he's a teacher, he's a Pharisee, he's a leader of the Israelis, he's all these things. And I can see why he would have come to Jesus at night, because maybe he had felt he had never had an opportunity to really sit down and talk to him. And maybe Jesus was a teacher also, and I think they both needed to understand why the other one felt the way they did and to learn more about each other. And so I don't think it was a confrontation. I think that it was more a learning on both sides.
No, that's a beautiful reading, Donna. And I do think it is noteworthy, right, that this conversation and this life-giving teaching that makes such a profound difference to the way that we live, that it should happen with not, one of the several disciples that have already been introduced in the gospel, that it should happen with somebody who is a leader in their own right, on their own, not with a big group of people, for once, not when there's a bunch of, there's a whole crowd. Usually Jesus is in crowds, not this time. So just the fact that it sort of defies certain expectations we have of where this should go on, and yet at the same time, as you note in this conversation, that it has an effect on everybody, that it has a gift to offer everybody. And something that you were saying, Eric, making me think of, the fact that God, here Jesus says, right, that God is giving God's own self to us. And there being something about giving oneself back, whether it's giving oneself over and surrendering, but a call to return the gift in some way.